This is lesson 95, part 7, and we're still in the past participles section, but in this part of the lesson, we're really going to tackle some principal parts in here, and we're going to tackle some really hard words. Now, look at this be verb right here. The be verb is so crazy confusing because it can be its very own word. It stands alone all by itself, but it is also a helping verb, right? It's a linking verb. So it's a crazy irregular English verb. So am, is, and are belong to the be verb. Was and were belong to the be verb. Am, is, and are, they are sitting you in the present tense. Was and were, they're sitting you in the past tense of the be. So many people get the be verb confused because they're not understanding what all of these other things are. So the be verb, you conjugate it in the present and the past tense. Now, the be verb, they are, when you say the be verb conjugates, it has 7 parts that it conjugates. And you could almost say it has 8. But so you say be, right? Been and been. And then you have its regular, crazy irregulars. Am, which is first person singular. Is, which is in third person singular. Are, which is second person singular or plural. And this puts you in the present tense. And was and were, this is singular and this is plural. But this is second person, right? So can you see why that would be really confusing? How you could use am as the helping verb. Am can be standing alone. I am running. That would be the helping verb. Word, have, is confusingly irregular English verb. It's so confusing. The reason why have is completely confusing is because it actually is its very own word, but it is also a helping verb. And so it does different things. So have and has, this right here puts you in, what is this? Have, is, so right here, if you're going to use these, this puts you in progressive, this puts you in perfect, but still, if you're going to use it in a helping verb, that's what it would do, but then it could also stand alone, and you would have to use these appropriately. This is first person, this is third person, and then this is the past tense. And so that can be really confusing. Have, it sits in the simple present, but has is the simple present third person singular. And then you have had is your simple past, and it's also your past participle, so you would need to use an auxiliary verb on had. So can you see how you would say I have had? Because you have to use an auxiliary verb, the appropriate auxiliary verb on the participle had. And so that's why people get it so confusing. What is had? Okay, so now another super confusing irregular English verb is do. Do is super confusing. And it's an irregular English verb, and it has 4 parts: do, does, did, and done. They can be helping verbs, but they can also stand all alone, all by themselves. And so that's why these can be really confusing. So look at do. It's your simple present. But does is your simple present third person singular. So this is simple present first person. This is your simple present, whether it's plural or in your first person, right? But this one has to be in your simple present third person, and it has to hit your singular subject. Do you see that? Did is your simple past, and then done is your past participle. So, but then these can sit all by themselves, but then they can sit as helping verbs. And that's why these are confusing. People have a hard time understanding what these are because they're not broken apart and you're not seeing what they actually can do. So if you know that this can stand by itself, this can stand by itself, the bees can stand by themselves, whether you're going to use them in their irregular form or not, sometimes you have to use the appropriate auxiliary verb to help you with that. Let's say you use it in the past participle. Done is in the past participle. I have done. So you have to use the appropriate auxiliary verb to fit right here. See how that works? But then this can also work as a helping verb. So you just need to understand what you're using it and how you're using these words right here. How many principal parts do we have? 4. So it's very important to remember principal parts are different than saying your participles. They're part of it. They go together. You need to understand them each different. So let's look at this. Your first principal part of be is be. Your second principal part of be is being. Your third principal part of be is was and were. This is your past. This is your progressive. And then your fourth principal part of be is been. And this is your perfect. So you could, that's why you can say I have been, she has been home. That's why you can use those together. Really fun. Don't you guys think that's so interesting and so fun? This is so fun. I'm not kidding. I am loving putting these lessons together for everybody. Okay, so now look, have. It's your first principal part. The second principal part is having, off of have. The third principal part is had. And then your fourth principal part is had. I have had. You could say she has had, right? So you just need to remember how to use those. And also, you need to also remember if you're using it as a participle, participles are shared with adjectives. Okay? So done can be an adjective if you know how to use it properly. First principal part is do, and then your second principal part is doing, the third principal part is did, and then your fourth principal part of do is done. Your third principal part of do is did, and your fourth principal part of do is done. What is really fun, so if you look at be, what is the first principal part? Do you remember?
Present.
It is your simple present, and it's your base word. Correct? And they don't take helping verbs when you're using it off the principal parts. So if you think about it being irregular, the be is so incredibly irregular that it has am. You could use am here, is here, are, and you have to use them appropriately in the appropriate position. And that's why it's confusing. You have to use this in first person, this in third person, this in second person in plural. So that's why this is confusing, but you need to know that they are attached here and they can be part of your first principal part. Be is the first principal part, but am, is, and are will go, that's if they stand alone. That's if they're standing alone or if they're working as a linking verb. But if you're wanting them to be a helping verb, then they would be sticking to your second principal part here. And so that's why these are so confusing. Let's go have is really fun because have you would work in first person and in second person, but has is in third person. So it would be attached to your first principal part. It is not considered the first principal part, but that's how you could maybe attach it and think, because has, when it is being used by itself, it is considered, it has to be used in third person, singular, third person singular. She has. Do is the first principal part, right? And then does goes with it. Because you have to use this in your simple present third person singular. But you use do in all of the other ones. But does is not considered the first principal part. But they go together because it's going to go in the third person singular simple present part. And same with has. So you need to remember that they go together with that. And it'll help you. These all are confusing because they can be helping verbs. And that's the reason why they can stand alone and they can be helping verbs. They can be am, is, are, was, were, be, been, and been. Right? Those are all helping verbs, linking verbs, and be verbs. Most verbs are derived with the first principal part. So, most verbs, the very first principal part is your base word. It is your base word. So you can take almost everything off of your base word unless you have an irregular. Irregular verbs are derived using the first, third, fourth principal part. So if you have an irregular verb, you need to really understand what the first, third, and fourth principal parts are in irregular verbs so that you can put them together correctly in sentences. But if you really understand the other ones and you know that it's not an irregular verb, you can derive everything off of your first principle because you just add your ing and you add your ed, and then you just need to understand how you're going to put your auxiliary verbs in there appropriately, which are your helping verbs. The third person singular simple present, make sure you watch out for that. That would be the does and the has. Make sure you're watching out for that. Many principal parts lists in English take out the second principal part. If you guys actually look at these lists, they'll take out the second principal part. Right here, this is typically taken out of the list because it's so easy to remember. This is easy to remember. And sometimes they take out the third principal part, depending on just what list you're looking at. It's because if it's at a regular verb, they just combine the third and the fourth together. Well, it's so easy to remember. So you take the first principal part and add on your ing to it. That's why it's so easy. The second principal part. Also, in many lists, the auxiliary verb is not showing on the participle. So it causes confusion on the second, third, and fourth principal parts. And I can see why some people leave out the auxiliary verb on your participles. Right here, I can see why they leave those out on the fourth principal part or on your participles list. It's because a participle can also be an adjective, right? And so adjectives do not take the auxiliary verb. The reason why lists can be confusing because they leave off the auxiliary verb off of your participles list, and then you're not understanding, well, does it need an auxiliary verb? If you're using a participle as a verb, it has to have an auxiliary verb. No matter what, you have to have an auxiliary verb. Now, if you're using a participle as an adverb or an adjective, then you don't have auxiliary verbs, and that's why they leave them. That's the reason why they leave them off. It makes complete sense to leave them off, but as a person that's first understanding, I think it needs to be on there, at least on a different list to show as an adjective. As an adjective, you need to have no auxiliary verb. As a participle, acting as a verb, as an adjective that is a participle, you need to show that there's not an auxiliary verb on there. But a participle that is a verb, you need to show that it has auxiliary verbs on there. It has to have it. Let's go through this again. First, second, third, and fourth principal parts. For your be, second principal part is being. The third principal part of be is was and were. The fourth principal part of be is been. So your first principal part of have is have. The second principal part of have is having. The third principal part of have is had. And the fourth principal part of have is had. The first principal part is do. The second principal part of do is doing. The third principal part of do is did. The fourth principal part of do is done. And so it would be really important for you to memorize these right here. I feel, boys, that this needs to be memorized.
All right.
I would tackle it and remember it because these are crazy confusables. All right, everybody, that's it for this lesson, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video. Bye.
Bye, everybody.